you never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Are authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime? With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case. Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flock at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
to each and every one of you
for helping our great nation
find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
on radio
and online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel, Britain's
news channel.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falarin-Iman, and Tom Harwood on your TV, radio and online. We're with you until midday with a show jam-packed with all of today's biggest stories, lots of discussion and expert guests, and our opinions as well as yours.
Yes, so make sure you get in touch with your views as usual. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the address. We'll be getting to those throughout the show, but before all of that, here are the latest headlines.
Good morning, I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB Newsroom. It's 2 minutes past 10. The Prime Minister is chairing his first cabinet meeting with his newly appointed team this morning. Yesterday, 6 ministers were reappointed to the same role, including Suella Braverman, who is again Home Secretary. Downing Street says the new team reflects a unified party. Later, it's expected he'll hold talks with the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, on their economic plans and decide when the fiscal plan, due to be delivered on Monday, will take place. Shadow Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson claims the government has no plans for growth.
We're in a terrible situation now as a country facing, that black hole that they've created, and we still don't actually fully know the scale of the damage because they've refused to publish the report from the Office of Budget Responsibility that would give us that information. But there is no plan for growth. We've had terrible growth under the Conservatives for the last 12 years, and in fact under Rishi Sunak, who was Chancellor for a significant period of that.
Well, at midday, Rishi Sunak will make his first appearance in the Commons as Prime Minister. He'll face opposition leader Sir Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's questions. It comes after he used his first public address to warn the country of difficult decisions. Labour has criticised Mr Sunak's decision to reappoint the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, a role she left last week over a breach of the ministerial code. Well, you can watch PMQs live here on GB News at midday. And Tory MSP and Scotland's Shadow Health Secretary, Dr Gulain, says Miss Braverman welcomed Miss Braverman's return.
Suella Braverman was right to resign, but Rishi Sunak's reappointed her because she paid the price for her mistake. But the other thing we need to be clear about, the cabinet we have is a unity cabinet. He is getting people in from across the broad church of the Conservative view in your cabinet to have those robust discussions.
Well, the new Prime Minister has held talks with the First Ministers of Scotland and Wales. In discussion with Nicola Sturgeon and Mark Drakeford, Rishi Sunak is said to have emphasised the UK's shared challenges, with Scotland's First Minister saying the talks have been constructive. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and US President Joe Biden were among the first world leaders to speak with Mr Sunak last night. In other news, Northern Ireland businesses are facing what they've described as a tipping point, with 1 in 5 businesses reportedly struggling. The president of the Northern Ireland Chamber, Gillian Macaulay, has called this week pivotal in ending Stormont's political stagnation. It comes as the Northern Ireland Secretary has warned that he'll call Assembly elections if Stormont is not restored by Friday. Meanwhile, a parliamentary committee is warning a proposed bill dealing with the legacy of Northern Ireland's troubles risks widespread breaches of human rights law. Ministers are proposing a form of amnesty for the perpetrators of Troubles crimes in exchange for cooperation with a new truth recovery body. The Joint Committee on Human Rights say the plans might not meet international standards on the duty to investigate deaths, but the government say the legislation as a whole complies with human rights laws. Around 7 in 10 NHS trusts are failing to meet their targets for cancer referrals. In England, the current maximum wait time for a hospital appointment for suspected cancer is 2 weeks. NHS England says 93% of patients should be seen within this time frame, but data shows this target is routinely not being met. As inflation surpasses 10%, experts are warning that scams and fraud are on the rise. Recent figures show that over £600 million were lost due to fraud in the first half of 2022. People are being urged to stay alert if they're looking to earn extra money as criminals look to exploit the cost of living crisis. A new study shows that people who join Scouts and Guides as children are more likely to have good health later in life. Scientists at the University of Edinburgh found that Scouts and Guides tend to have better mental health as adults and even have higher levels of class mobility. With almost 500,000 children currently in Scouts, researchers are calling it a cost-effective way of improving the health of the population. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now it's back to the point.
Well, a very good morning to you. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and Inaya Falaram Iman on your TV, radio and online. We've got a really jam-packed show lined up for you today to kick-start your day. So here's what's coming up.
Yesterday, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak put together his top team with many familiar faces, including Suella Braverman and Jeremy Hunt. Mr Sunak is chairing his first cabinet meeting this morning ahead of Prime Minister's questions, where he will face Labour leader Keir Starmer later on today.
Yes, and in his first address to the nation, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak talked about placing economic stability at the heart of his government's agenda and said tough decisions will be made. He pledged to work day in and day out to deliver. I'm just hearing that we're getting some cabinet exits from Downing Street. I wonder if we might well be able to see those in just a moment, just to keep that on our toes. But yes, we'll be talking about the new Prime Minister and if he can deliver on economic challenges. Robert Jenrick there the new Home Office Junior Minister. He attends Cabinet now, back in. Penny Mordaunt and Lord True behind them, Mark Harper. Now Mark Harper is in at the DWP, I think. Oh, no, he's not. And there with Steve Barclay, the new Health Secretary, walking next to Gillian Keegan. We're getting quite a few people all getting out thick and fast from Downing Street. And a lot of these Cabinet appointments, these new people sitting around Cabinet, aren't all that new. Many of them are brought back from perhaps even David Cameron's time. Mark Harper, of course, was a chief whip for David Cameron. Michael Gove has been brought back too. There's Therese Coffey, one of the survivors from the Liz Truss era. She was, of course, Deputy Prime Minister under Liz Truss, now Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Secretary. Walking there with Victoria Atkins. We can see our very own Darren McCaffrey there watching on. I wonder if he's shouting at these lovely people as they try and leave. It's a tradition, of course, in Downing Street for the journalists, the hacks, to shout questions to which they do not expect many answers. Let's just see, because it does look like there will be a few more people leaving that very, very, very famous front door. But in the meantime, we are joined in the studio. We are joined on Downing Street by Darren McCaffrey, who is there watching that door. Darren, how many people have been leaving? We caught the last dozen or so, half dozen or so.
Transport.
Transport. Of course.
It is difficult to keep across all these things, isn't it? Most of them seem to have left. I'm trying to think of the people we have. We haven't seen James Cleverly, the Foreign Secretary, leave yet. We haven't seen Suella Braverman leave yet. Jeremy Hunt, he might just pop across the corridor into number 11, mightn't he? Yeah, interesting, though, that they spent, 35 minutes, I think, in Cabinet this morning. Pretty brief, I would have thought, for a first Cabinet meeting, given the fact that the first 5-10 minutes of it is a photo call. I'm sure we'll get those pictures a little later on. Tom Tugendhat, you and I were talking about it. He turned up 10 minutes late, so he must have been only there for a couple of minutes. In saying that, you would have thought they've got some really kind of big fundamental discussions and decisions to make when it comes to the economy, comes to departmental spending, comes to potential tax rises down the road. And we know that there are very serious discussions taking place at the moment about whether that medium-term fiscal plan that was scheduled for this coming Monday...
Darren, a door behind you. Who's just popped out there?
Date.
Can't quite see.
That is not a minister, Tom.
Not a minister.
It's
too far away from me on my little screen.
I think he might be a bodyguard. He might be a bodyguard. More to follow. I think he might be James Cleverly's bodyguard. We'll keep you posted on that. I think looking at the wider picture, though, obviously there have been some controversial appointments, I think it's fair to say, most notably that of Suella Braverman, even though the Cabinet mainly reflects people we've seen in the past in the same jobs. Questions, of course. Rishi Sunak stood in Downing Street yesterday, didn't he, talking about integrity, talking about high standards, professionalism. Labour this morning making hay with the fact that they feel, well, if you look at all of those 3 words, or 4 words, that actually Suella Braverman falls at each of those hurdles with that revelation that she claims, sent emails, forwarded on emails that she shouldn't have done last week that led to her resignation as Home Secretary, suggestions she broke the ministerial code, suggestions that the Cabinet Secretary, Simon Case, is not very happy with her reappointment yesterday. And I think at PMQs today, Prime Minister's going to have to put up with some questions on that from Keir Starmer. Now, he clearly thinks she deserves a second chance. He clearly thinks that they're on the same page when it comes to this really tough issue of migration, particularly trying to tackle the small boats crisis in English Channel. And there we go, that's Dominic Raab leaving. A good first Cabinet, Mr. Raab? Very good was the word there from the Deputy Prime Minister, back in post as Deputy Prime Minister and indeed Justice Secretary this morning. You're right, Tom, in suggesting that lots of these people are not just familiar faces to all of us. There he is, the Foreign Secretary. Good first Cabinet Foreign Secretary and International Development Minister. Thank you. And some more officials. It is interesting, isn't it, Tom, that I had to correct myself almost there. I almost called Andrew Mitchell International Development Secretary. his old job. But of course, it's no longer a department having been absorbed inside the Foreign Office. They are literally, and this is interesting if you don't know the geography of Downing Street, the Downing Street door is there. The Foreign Office is literally immediately opposite. So they are essentially just walking into their offices in the space of about 60 seconds. James Cleverly there, still Foreign Secretary, and Andrew Mitchell as International Development Minister, but a senior Minister of State who does attend a cabinet. So at PMQs today, it'll be a real test, I think, for Rishi Sunak. How does he bat away those questions about Suella Braverman? I also suspect Keir Starmer will go on some of the big decisions about public spending, about austerity 2.0, because those decisions will have to be made, and I think they will be pretty difficult, pretty uncomfortable decisions. Eye-watering, Jeremy Hunt called them last week, and I think Labour will probably go on both of those two issues. But this is the first time Rishi Sunak would have stood in the dispatch box as Prime Minister. It'll be an interesting first session, and then he'll come back here. Well, first of all, actually, he'll stay in the Commons to do a lot more sackings of junior ministerial posts, and then he'll return here to Downing Street to reappoint a whole range of other ministers, because this reshuffle has far from ended in many regards. There are lots and lots of ministerial jobs still to fill, and that will drag into today, this evening, maybe into tomorrow as well.
Well, thank you, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor, for bringing us the latest on the political developments of the last few days. Well, joining us now, also in the studio, to talk about Sunak's first day in office is Sam Lister, political editor of the Daily Express. Thank you for joining us. I mean, many people are pleasantly surprised by some of these cabinet appointments. For example, a lot of people thought that we might be seeing originally something akin to a kind of George Osborne Cameron years, but actually he's brought in Suella Braverman. Kemi Badenoch has stayed as Trade Secretary and also been given the Equalities Brief. What's your take on what's been happening?
I think it would have been very difficult to move Kemi, because she's incredibly popular within the party. She's clearly the future of the party, and it would have been madness to move her. And she made it clear she wanted to stay in that role. She's very happy doing international trade. So that was kind of a done deal, I think. Suella, obviously, is the most controversial appointment. Now, she's controversial outside the party. Obviously, Labour and the Lib Dems are really going to kind of go at this. Obviously, she was sacked only a week ago for breaching the ministerial code. She's also very controversial in the party. So it is a party of two very disparate wings. They are at war. Certainly on the kind of more centrist side of the party. I was talking to MPs yesterday and the day before, and they were just horrified by Suella's appointment on that kind of centrist wing. She's also got some enemies within the right of the party as well, though. You know, there are these personal grudges that have built up over years. So I think that is a very controversial appointment. And what she decides to do with migration will be absolutely crucial, because obviously this India trade deal, that's all fallen apart because of her attitude to migration on that side of things. So that will be interesting to watch.
Yes, certainly. And I suppose one of the big questions is, and I believe we do have some graphics that we can probably work up and show in the next few minutes, of what the last cabinet of Liz Truss looked like. That was a photograph taken yesterday morning, compared to just how many of them are gone, because we do talk about sort of continuity and stability, and yes, there is an element of that, but also 18 of those faces that sat there for that cabinet photograph yesterday morning are no longer sitting around the cabinet table.
Yeah, and clearly a lot of the Liz Truss supporters were also crossed over with Boris Johnson backers, and so Rishi Sunak had to kind of make his decision of how do I keep those two groups on side, but also put in my own people. He kept in there Therese Coffey. Now, that is an interesting choice, because she describes herself as Liz Truss's best mate. Now, we know in politics, political friendships, they are built on shifting sands. And ultimately, if you're offered a job in cabinet, you know, people make that choice that you are serving the country and it's better to be inside. And I'm sure actually Liz Truss probably thinks that is the right move. But it was interesting, that was an olive branch to the Liz Truss group to keep in her best mate. He also kept in James Cleverly, who's been a very close ally of Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. And so, again, that was a bit of a kind of attempt to reach out to that side of the party. But as you say, Tom, he cleared out plenty of people.
But isn't that a kind of positive sign for the country going forward, that, you know, many of the criticisms of Liz Truss was that she focused too much on allies and it was quite insular. But Rishi Sunak is looking at bringing the party together, the different factions, and hopefully that can then move the country forward, and instead of focusing solely on the eyes of the Conservative Party.
Yeah, but if you look on the kind of wider picture of the whole cabinet now, there are a lot of people from times gone by, and it does have a bit of a Osborne Cameron feel to it in some respects. You know, there are a lot of kind of, and like bringing back Michael Gove. Now he is obviously. From a journalist's point of view, it's great to have Michael Gove back in cabinet because he is somebody who always creates news. So very interesting to see that. But he also, he does wind people up, and there are people in that cabinet who find him very, very, very difficult to work with.
Something I found interesting about Michael Gove's new appointment is it's not just to the Department of Levelling Up, Housing, Communities and Local Government, but he's also got this responsibility for talking to the devolved administrations, for the union, and perhaps the idea that Rishi Sunak last night phoned up Mark Drakeford and Nicola Sturgeon was a bit of a break from how Liz Truss was doing things as well. Might Michael Gove be quite an important part here to play in sort of uniting the country?
Yeah, and Liz Truss, her approach was just to ignore Nicola Sturgeon, pretend she's not there, you know, it's not happening. I think Michael Gove, obviously, he is from Scotland, he understands the issues about protecting the union incredibly well, probably better than anybody, really. And so that really is an important role, and actually an important symbol from Rishi Sunak there, that this is something he thinks is crucial, you know, obviously with the Northern Ireland issues over the Brexit protocol. There are tensions in the union, and clearly he wants to try and keep the union in one piece.
And just finally, I mean, what can we expect, do you think, from Prime Minister Rishi Sunak at PMQs later today?
Yeah, it's going to be interesting, isn't it? Because obviously we're used to very combative Liz Truss, we're used to kind of roll with the punches Boris Johnson. Rishi Sunak is very similar to Keir Starmer in a way, you know, very kind of detailed and very calm, and you know, it could almost be quite dull. Let's be honest, but we will wait and see.
I should just say these are new pictures of Rishi Sunak's first cabinet. For those watching on television, these are inside pictures from what just took place inside Number 10, the first cabinet meeting of Rishi Sunak. And I have to say, a lot of smiling faces around there. And another person there, Andrew Mitchell, of course, who hasn't been in cabinet since the days of David Cameron, Mark Harper, another Cameroon, Jeremy Hunt, another Cameroon, Grant Shapps, another Cameroon. It is feeling quite Cameroonian.
It's very retro. It's a very retro cabinet. But I suppose, you know, the whole pitch was we want to find people who can do the job, and these are people who've been in the job in the past. And so if you've got to get to grips with things very quickly, you don't want to be starting from scratch with people who've never had the brief. So he's gone back to people who've done this before, who know the brief, who know how government works. And probably quite a sensible move at this point.
Talk about winding back the last 45 days. This may well be winding us back to 2016, so perhaps when people last felt stability in the country. That might be a subliminal message there from Rishi Sunak. Well, yes, Sam Lister, thank you so much for your insight there as well. Really, really interesting stuff. It's going to be a fascinating day ahead.
Yeah, and we'll be bringing you all of those developments after the break. New PM Rishi Sunak says he will work day in and day out to deliver for you. But will he deliver on the economic challenges the country faces? We'll be discussing all of that with our business and economics editor, Liam Halligan, just in a moment.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here.
You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
It's 10:24. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Flower-Newman and Tom Harwood. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning.
And Tory MPs have been defending Rishi Sunak and his decision to reappoint Suella Braverman as Home Secretary. She, of course, came under fire because of her admitted breach of security in her resignation letter to Liz Truss. Why is the appointment of Suella Braverman proving so controversial then? Well, our South West reporter Jeff Moody is in her constituency of Fareham. Jeff, thanks for joining us. What's the mood on the ground in Suella's constituency?
Well, there are several issues, Tom, that people are talking to me about this morning. Firstly, there is this breach of ministerial conduct. Some saying, look, it wasn't particularly serious. She sent out an email late at night from the wrong email account. But others saying, look, this was a serious breach. And there's all sorts of questions about her integrity surrounding this. Some people read an article in a Sunday newspaper this week that said that she's been lying about it, that it's a more serious breach than we first heard, that she didn't go immediately to the Prime Minister like she said she did. All sorts of murky goings on as to exactly what happened. And some people are saying, look, this is the last thing that a new Prime Minister needs, especially as he stood on the steps of Downing Street less than this time yesterday, to say, look, we're going to govern with integrity now, with honesty now, with professionalism now. And then he immediately appointed somebody where all three of those issues have been put into question only in the last week. Then there's the issue of a coup. What happened 6 days ago arguably was the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of Liz Truss's premiership. So we now have a situation where the Prime Minister, some say, was very influential in the deposing of Boris Johnson back in the summer. The Home Secretary was someone that was very influential just a week ago in dethroning Liz Truss as Prime Minister. So some people saying, you know, the coup is complete. This is indeed a coup and shouldn't be allowed. And then, of course, there's the issues of the policy. The Rwanda policy, hugely controversial, as is the whole issue of immigration. So people here very confused, I would say, very conflicted. They like her personally, they like what she stands for within their constituency, but very worried indeed about this issue of integrity.
Well, fascinating stuff. Well, hopefully we'll revisit this when we speak to some people later. Thank you, Jeff Moody, our South West reporter. Now, in other news, UK government borrowing costs fell across global markets to pre-mini budget levels when news emerged Rishi Sunak was to become the Prime Minister.
Yes, in his speech on the steps of Downing Street, Sunak talked about placing economic stability at the heart of his government's agenda. He also spoke of tough decisions to be made. Of course, there's still a cost of living crisis. Inflation is still in double figures, and there's a housing crisis and possible looming recession, but the pound is up and gilt yields are slightly down. Let's find out what all of this means now with our economics and business editor, Liam Halligan.
Well, thank you for joining us, Liam. So tell us, what are the latest economic developments? We now have Rishi Sunak as the Prime Minister. Are the markets now feeling more confident?
Well, they are to a degree, and of course political analysts want to think it's all about the politics, and it is a bit about the politics, but not entirely about the politics. As Tom said there, the pound is now back up at $1.16. It hasn't been there since mid-September, and gilt yields have fallen at the weekend, at the height of the Tory turmoil, when it looks as if there'll be another drawn-out leadership campaign, Boris Johnson warring with Rishi Sunak. It was costing the government 4.1% a year to borrow for 10 years. This minimum borrowing cost, the gilt yield, ripples out across the economy, of course, impacts mortgages and other personal loans. It's now 3.6. It just dipped below 3.6. That's a major move. That's partly, though, because of the fact that the government's energy price cap could end up being a lot cheaper than we otherwise thought. I've got a graphic here. Let's just take a look at the wholesale gas price, if we can.
Wow.
You see there, I'm going to have to, we'll remove the strap. Now, GB News listeners on radio will have to trust me on this, but what this shows is, on the left-hand side there, that's February. That is the price of gas on European wholesale markets below €100 per megawatt hour. It then spikes up. That's the war in Ukraine. That's Putin invading Ukraine. It then goes down a bit when everyone realises, oh, it's OK, gas is still being pumped. But then it ramps up again, that big peak in the middle of the summer. That's when everybody was stockpiling gas. That's when people were realising, crikey, this war's going to go on a long time.
This is when we were talking about bills going up to £6,500.
Absolutely. So that big spike there on the right-hand side of the screen, that is European wholesale gas at €350 per megawatt hour. Absolutely massive. It was at that point that people were talking about, if you try and hold down the gas price, if you implement this energy price cap, it could cost 100, 150 billion, 250 billion pounds. People just plucking numbers out the air because no one knew. And at that time, some of us were saying, actually, wholesale gas prices are likely to fall from this point. It could be a lot cheaper. And what happened yesterday, Tom, is the European wholesale gas price fell below €100 per megawatt hour, down from 350 for the first time since before the war in Ukraine. Now, that's still roughly twice what they've been over the previous 10 years. These gas prices are still elevated, but this is a chink of light for two reasons. It's a chink of light for the government because if this energy price cap isn't going to cost them tens, hundreds of billions, suddenly the markets are much happier about their potential borrowing costs. And be in no doubt, what really spooked the markets about Trussonomics was the energy price cap. It was not the lowering the top rate of tax, as every Tom, Dick and Harry in politics wanted to
That would cost, what, $2 billion?
$2 billion out of total government revenue of $900 billion.
But what does this imply, then? If prices for the wholesale price of gas was up at $350, it's now just dipped below $100, less than a third. How much does that imply the energy price cap will cost the government?
It might be, incredibly, that the energy price cap costs almost nothing.
Wow.
Because the price cap has been set for an average family to be about £3,500. The government cost is if they have to subsidise.
And it may not reach that.
And it may not reach that. I mean, it is above it a bit. It's costing the government money now because it started, the subsidy. But if the government sort of, quotes, making money out of the scheme in weeks and months to come, look, but all this, what people want to know is what this means for their bills, right?
Yes.
At the moment, it doesn't mean anything for their bills because I imagine because these gas prices could spike up again if we get another real flare-up in the geopolitics between Russia and the West, and we get, sabotage of pipelines from Norway to the UK. I'm not saying that will happen, but clearly that is possible, given what happened to the Nord Stream 2 pipeline between Germany and Russia across the Baltic Sea. I think the cap will stay in place till April. But what it does mean, if these lower gas prices are sustained, suddenly Rishi Sunak's a lucky man and the government's finances look a lot better than we thought. And suddenly the possibility of blackouts this winter is a lot lower. Now, it's been a mild October. That's helped to drive down these European gas prices. European countries, to a greater extent than us, have a lot of gas in storage. Our storage facilities are very, very limited. But in the here and now, it looks as if, come the spring, we may see gas prices falling again. We may see energy bills falling again. There may be light at the end of this inflationary tunnel if these falls in wholesale gas continue.
Wow. Really fascinating stuff. Liam Halligan, probably the most important news of the morning there for us all, certainly the most consequential as we look forward. Liam Halligan, thank you for joining us. After the break, we'll be talking about a related subject, of course, Just Stop Oil, a protest group that have sprayed paint over the offices of what they describe as pro-oil think tanks, because they say we're in an existential crisis.
Well, but during this cost of living crisis, can we really afford to turn down additional sources of fuel? We'll be chatting all about that just after the morning headlines.
Good morning, it's 10:33. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has chaired his first cabinet meeting with his newly appointed team. A number of ministers have been given the same role, with Downing Street saying the cabinet reflects a unified party. Later, it's expected the Prime Minister will hold talks with the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, on their economic plans and decide when the fiscal plan, due to be delivered on Monday, will take place. Shadow Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson says the government has no plans for growth.
We're in a terrible situation now as a country, facing, that black hole that they've created, and we still don't actually fully know the scale of the damage because they've refused to publish the report from the Office of Budget Responsibility that would give us that information. But there is no plan for growth. We've had terrible growth under the Conservatives for the last 12 years, and in fact under Rishi Sunak, who was Chancellor for a significant period of that.
Well, at midday, Rishi Sunak will make his first appearance in the Commons as Prime Minister. He'll face opposition leader Sir Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's questions. Labour has criticised Mr Sunak's decision to reappoint the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, a role she left last week over a breach of the ministerial code. Well, you can watch PMQs live here on GB News at midday. Well, the new Prime Minister has held talks with the First Ministers of Scotland and Wales. In discussion with Nicola Sturgeon and Mark Drakeford, Rishi Sunak is said to have emphasised the UK's shared challenges, with Scotland's First Minister saying the talks have been constructive. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and US President Joe Biden were among the first world leaders to speak with Mr Sunak last night. And in other news, the Princess of Wales is to be the patron of a new mission for an army officer to be the first woman to cross Antarctica solo. Catherine is formally backing Captain Preet Chandy's challenge of travelling more than 1,000 miles across the frozen continent. The army officer has spoken with the princess, we hear, on the phone, who wished her good luck. TV, online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank and, of course, fun. Every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Well, good morning. It's 10:38 and this is To The Point with me, Tom Harwood, and Anaya Falarin-Iman here on GB News. We're live on your television, online and indeed on your radio this morning.
Now, yesterday, activists from Just Stop Oil sprayed the headquarters of a group of think tanks with paint. And earlier this morning, 2 Just Stop Oil supporters sprayed orange paint over several luxury car dealers, including Bentley, Bugatti and Ferrari.
Well, this is part of the activist group's planned disruption throughout the month of October. Disruption is, of course, a light word for what is really criminal damage. But the activists said in a statement that, quote, "We're on the streets of London because politics is broken. It was broken here in Tufton Street by shady, opaquely funded lobbyists who now stalk the corridors of power, thanks to Liz Truss. Their bankrupt ideas have brought the economy to its knees." Ironic from people who want to stop productive money-making activities in this country.
Well, then they added, quote, "Liz Truss's toxic pro-oil policies helped end her career. And unless we ditch them, they'll finish us off too. We cannot afford new oil and gas." Well, joining us now to discuss this is Andy Mayer, Chief Operating Officer and Energy Analyst at the Institute of Economic Affairs. I mean, why do we allow conspiracy theories when it comes from certain political ideologies? You know, shady, dark money in Tufton Street and Liz Truss is pulling all of the strings. I mean, this is just a conspiracy theory. What do you think?
Well, if it's a conspiracy, we're evidently not doing very well because several of those things are no longer true. I mean, it's very tempting to say at this point, you know, bless them, they're just numpties. I was young once and believed in silly things, and they'll grow out of it. But the chap who sprayed the think tanks yesterday, not ours, by the way, we're in a different building, is a pensioner. He looks like he comes more from the radical tanky wing of the hard left movement, and he was making his statements and saying things that were demonstrably untrue, that if they actually got their way would cause people to die. And I just want to underpin that point. This is not a harmless group having a good time making a mess and causing criminal damage in London. Their ideas are dangerous and awful. They believe stopping oil and gas in the medium term, which first would put up the price of both, which means that pensioners could not afford to heat their homes in winter. The government cannot guarantee to suppress energy prices forever. We've seen what happens to the markets when they try to do that. And what would happen if we did stop drilling all across the world is those prices would go up, the alternatives would not be ready, they'd certainly be incentivised by higher prices, but we don't benefit from that. It just means we get the same energy at a higher cost. So they're talking about stopping heat, they're talking about stopping transport, they're talking about stopping power for most of the time. All of those things are very, very dangerous and should not be indulged.
It is interesting that these people sort of see themselves as democratic when, to me, to any rational observer, I would have thought this is the opposite of democracy. This is trying to change the course of a democratically elected government through intimidation, through threats, and yes, indeed, through violence against property in this case. Why is it being indulged?
Well, I think if you go back to when the Extinction Rebellion protests start, there was a lot of indulging going on from the police. It was sort of, oh, they're just having a bit of fun, and we sort of agree with their general point that the environment and climate change is important, which, just to be clear, is the received wisdom and view across most institutions and the government. So quite whose minds they're trying to change is very unclear. Most people agree with their long-term aim, but not their methods. And that indulging has diminished now. I mean, I think the police were humiliated when this group last week attacked Scotland Yard, and there were police officers standing around doing very little to intervene when they could quite clearly should have arrested them for criminal damage immediately and taken them away. I think there's about 7 Just Stop Oil protesters in prison at the moment, about 31 over the course of the last 6 months, and that number will increase because they seem intent on causing this damage and criminal behaviour without anybody doing enough to stop them.
I mean, what do you say to those who say, actually, maybe there's some truth in what they're saying? They've said, you know, Liz Truss's ideas have been rejected, and now, you know, Liz Truss finds herself on the backbenches, Prime Minister only a couple of weeks ago, and that many of those free market, so to speak, think tanks that are associated with 55 Tufton Street, some people think that their ideas have been discredited since Liz Truss's premiership. So what would you say to that?
Well, this is selective thinking, isn't it? I mean, Liz Truss's big flagship policy was one of the largest acts of Tory socialism since Rishi Sunak did the last one over COVID. So she introduced the energy price guarantee and a similar scheme for business that would have cost £100 to £200 billion a year, depending on the price of gas in the regional market. Now, that ain't free market. We suggested as an alternative that what she should do is increase targeted benefits so the poor and vulnerable would not suffer. She should help businesses that would be more exposed to energy prices, and then she should cut taxes instead of letting bringing the prices down so that you would retain that incentive to use less energy, which she did not do. So a huge mistake, on which she put a few free market ideas that cost money as well, but they were about 20% of the package. So all the left wants to do at the moment is talk about that 20%, and on the day they talked about just 1% of it. So it's not true, and it is a record of failure that's very sad, but one hopefully that Rishi Sunak can now correct.
Just finally, can we smash once and for all this ridiculous theory that 55 Tufton Street is some sort of controlled nexus of all politics in this country, because it's not even the nexus of all free market think tanks in this country. Indeed, your think tank, the Institute of Economic Affairs, is on Lord North Street. The Adam Smith Institute is on Great Smith Street. I mean, there are plenty of streets where different organisations... Your organisation has existed since 1955. There are different organisations that do high-quality research in Westminster that provide research papers and indeed ideas for this debate. That the idea that this is some sort of controlled, shadowy, sinister, conspiratorial nexus, it verges into the sort of peculiar conspiracy theories that we sometimes hear from people who bang on about the World Economic Forum or the COVID Bill Gates people who control the world. Can you set the record straight on this matter?
Well, I don't think that anybody who's ever met a group of libertarian or economically liberal thinkers would think they could be organised. They all disagree with each other. So, I mean, even the wider discipline of economics, it's an old saying that if you get two economists in a room, you'll have 16 different ideas, and none of them will be compatible. And it is fundamentally the job of politics to take what ideas there are out there, the better researched ones preferably, and then choose a political programme that they think they can deliver and the electorate will abide. And clearly the last 45-day government did not do that. This current administration may do better, but it's not the job of economics think tanks to start commentating on the performance of the Prime Minister. Our job is to say, we think these ideas will help you, and it's their job to say, thank you very much, yes or no.
Perhaps the Just Stop Oil people should set up a think tank of their own with their millions of funding that comes, in many cases, actually, from the guilty children of oil executives.
Indeed, and, actually anti-fracking protesters, some Russian money has gone into that
It was their former head of NATO that suggested that the anti-fracking movement in this country was influenced by Russia. Really interesting and not remarked upon enough. But... thank you so much, Andy Meyer of the Institute of Economic Affairs, for joining us. Really, really interesting stuff there and important clarifications as well.
Well, new Prime Minister Rishi Sunak faces his first outing at Prime Minister's Questions at midday today. We'll be bringing you the latest live on GB News right here. But how will the Labour Party react to the change in Prime Minister? Well, Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer was quick on the attack against Mr Sunak, saying, quote, Rishi Sunak stabbed Boris Johnson in the back when he thought he could get his job. And in the same way, he will now try and disown the Tory record of recent years and recent months and pretend that he is in a new broom.
Well, as Rishi Sunak entered Downing Street, a poll for Retfield and Wilton Strategies gave the Labour Party a 33% lead over the Tories. That's consistent, has been consistent for the last few weeks. So is the only way up for Rishi Sunak, or is that mountain simply too high to climb? Let's discuss this now with Barry Shearman, the Labour MP for Huddersfield. And Barry, thank you so much for joining us here on GB News this morning.
Nice to be here.
I suppose the first question here is, will Prime Minister's questions be particularly interesting today? After all, Sir Keir Starmer is someone who casts himself as a boring centrist, and isn't that exactly the same thing that Rishi Sunak pertains to be?
I don't see either of them as boring centrists, and I'm looking forward to the meeting of these two minds this afternoon. I've got the advantage over most people, having been in Parliament since 1979. So I've seen a few Prime Ministers come and a few go, and many leaders of the opposition as well. So, yes, I will be looking at it with some sense of history, especially as I'll be welcoming Sir John Major to Huddersfield tonight to give the Harold Wilson lecture.
And also, Barry, though, hasn't Labour benefited over the last few weeks of a Tory party in disarray, to say the least? And now a lot of people are hoping Rishi Sunak will bring some unity and clarity. And therefore, would that not now put Labour Party leader Keir Starmer in some worry, as the focus is not necessarily Tory party.
I'm sorry, you got that entirely wrong. This is the same old gang. As I was watching the appointments to the cabinet yesterday, it's just the same old gang. They've been reshuffled. They're more or less the same. A few have dropped out and a few have come back that we thought whose political career was absolutely over, like Michael Gove. But it's what we see as a really tired party. They're tired, they have no ideas, they don't have cohesion, and they can't get on together. So this is only a very temporary sort of accord, a bit of peace in between this civil war that's going on in the Conservative Party. But I predict that it hasn't gone away. These two wings of the party are alive and well and keen to fight each other every morning. So I look forward to Keir Starmer this afternoon being the voice of reason, remembering what we all know, that some of these people, the same people, even the new Prime Minister, is one of the guilty men that took us out of Europe. And as the former chairman of the Bank of England said this weekend, Mervyn King, that no one will accept, the rotting elephant in the room is that our GDP, our wealth of our country has plummeted since we came out of Europe. Well, Rishi Sunak was one of the people that took us out of Europe. The Tories took us out of Europe.
Compared to many of our European colleagues.
All of us, whether it's Keir Starmer or me, we've got to pick up the pieces.
Keir Starmer pushed forward a second referendum. I mean, many of the Labour Party may be in the polls doing better in the Red Wall now, but when scrutiny comes of the Labour Party, that the question of a second referendum may well be part of that democratic question as well for the Labour Party.
Yeah, I don't think all of us, quite honestly, all of us who put the country before the party want a period of calm. We want the markets to calm. We want mortgage and interest rates to come down. Of course we want that. We actually want some agreement across party to help the people that are going to be, families with children are not going to have heat in the home this winter or food in their tummies. So, there's got to be some working together for calm in the economy and in the country. That's for the good of all of us. And I think Keir Starmer will be making that very rational case this afternoon.
John Major, in your constituency this evening. You, of course, were in Parliament throughout the 1980s, Margaret Thatcher's time in office. Many people were thinking that the Conservative Party, by the end of the 1980s, had been in power for a very long time, that it was inevitable that Neil Kinnock's Labour Party would win. But of course, the Tories then got rid of Margaret Thatcher, installed the man you're hosting later today, John Major. And John Major managed to win, to many people's surprise, the 1992 general election. Could it be that Rishi Sunak is this generation's John Major?
I doubt it. I've watched Rishi Sunak in his whole career. And the fact of the matter is, I think that he has not got that quality that John Major had. I believe that Rishi Sunak has got an unenviable task trying to lead this mob, but the similarity is around about the time we're talking about. You saw a government that was tired. It lacked ideas. It lost its sense of purpose of why it was in power. And even then, people had come and gone. They got rid of Margaret Thatcher. They had John Major for a while. I have to say, nothing like the problems that we have today with Prime Minister after Prime Minister. People come to London now to see not the changing of the guard, but the changing of the Prime Minister. And it made our country unstable. And if you looked at the television yesterday, you knew this was a tired old crew that had run out of steam. And that's the difference. That's why we do need a general election soon, so that you can get someone with fresh ideas, fresh leadership to get this country out of the mess it's been in over recent years.
Well, Barry Shearman, really appreciate your time this morning on College Green, just outside Parliament. We'll let you get inside to get your seat for Prime Minister's questions, no doubt. And we may well be able to see you.
Very windy this morning.
As we watch it later
Cold
on.
air
Thank you very
outside,
much.
hot air inside.
Oh, brilliant. Always great value. Barry Shearman there, the Labour Member of Parliament.
Indeed. Well, in other news, hundreds of dock workers at the Port of Liverpool have begun another round of strike action in a dispute over pay. Staff also walked out back in September, but no agreement was made. Our North West of England reporter Sophie Reaper has this story from the picket lines.
One of the busiest container ports in Northern Europe, brought to a standstill by the latest round of dock strikes. Workers at the Port of Liverpool have come together to demand a wage increase in line with the rise in inflation, but so far a deal is yet to be struck.
This is a profitable company, and we believe, like other workers in the country, we're facing the cost of living crisis like everybody else, and we want a fair deal for our members.
The Port of Liverpool is run and operated by Peel Ports, who last week reported they had offered their workers an 11% pay rise. That would be the highest percentage increase of any port group in the UK.
Peel Ports' press statement is a complete misrepresentation of the deal that was put to us. There are 3 groups on strike here. 2 of them have been offered 9%. The other group that Peel claim is 11% offer is actually 9.2% and a one-off payment.
What would it take for the workers to go back to work?
Well, I believe if Peel Ports made an offer of 11% like the claiming they have, I think that would be the basis of an acceptable deal.
There are, of course, 2 sides to every story, and strikes are now going to continue here at the Port of Liverpool for the next 2 weeks. That's unless Peel Ports will offer the dock workers a rise in pay that they deem to be acceptable.
In a statement, Peel Ports have said the latest 2-week strike will cause yet further damage to our customers, the business and the Liverpool City region, threatening even more jobs at the port. It's wholly irresponsible of Unite to prolong this self-defeating strike. And so, for now at least, it seems negotiations at the Port of Liverpool remain as unmoved as the shipping containers, with its workers prepared to be on strike for the long haul. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
Well, Sophie, thank you for bringing us that from those picket lines there.
Yeah, we're going to be going to some of your views right now. I just wanted to pick up on a point quickly that we're talking about in terms of the conspiracy theories with Just Stop Oil.
Yeah.
I do think, since COVID, there has been a rise in thinking, conspiratorial thinking, whether that's on the left and the right.
Yes.
And I do think it is reflective, perhaps, of a sense of powerlessness. And I do worry if we kind of veer into a sense of defeatism, thinking it's all just shadowy elites running the country. And that takes us away from our ability to change things politically ourselves as citizens.
I think that's a really, really profound point and one to dwell on. But let's have a look at what some people have been writing in to say, because Christopher says that Labour are like a stuck record. They do not have an answer for the global economy crash, nor do they ever answer the question about how they would fund their empty promises. That's Christopher's view.
Well, Sue says, like many, if the socialist blob get rid of Suella, i.e. the new Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, I will never vote Conservative. I will defect to Reform. Like many, if she stays, then they will get my vote. And, we were talking about that, whether or not she is a divisive figure. She does seem to have a solid amount of support, particularly in the Tory grassroots.
Well, I suppose this is what some divisive figures have more. Sort of some of the figures that people would say, oh, they're very nice or whatever. They don't have the hardcore supporters or detractors. Whereas it does seem like Suella Braverman does have her hardcore detractors, but she certainly has her hardcore supporters, one of whom is Richie, who has written in to say, Suella Braverman, I am 100% behind her. She will be a brilliant Home Secretary, massive, massive supporter of Suella. She made a mistake. She owns up to it. That shows honesty. She resigned from her post. That shows integrity and that she's trustworthy. That's Richie's view.
Yeah, well, fascinating. Staff John is saying 12 years of printing money to get the banks out of their casino gambling, for which we have paid with austerity, destroying all of our services. It's time for us for the banks and businesses to actually get some payback. Well, some important thoughts there. Keep all of your thoughts coming in, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We'll be getting to those just after the break.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. You've been cancelled. Join the club. Oh my goodness me. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
We are GB News.
And we'd like to say thank you
To each and every one of you.
For helping our great nation
Find its voice.
We're absolutely everywhere.
across England, Scotland,
Wales and Northern Ireland.
On TV,
On radio.
And online.
We're proud to be
the People's Channel.
Britain's
News channel.
On the Mark Steyn Show, we cover the stories a lot of people are scared even to mention. The stuff that really matters with some of the world's biggest thinkers.
Now is his opportunity to kind of take the steering wheel of history.
Break away from the flop at 8 o'clock on GB News with the Mark Steyn Show.
Every Saturday at 2 o'clock, join me, Darren Grimes, for Real Britain. I'm not afraid to give you a platform and say it how it is.
Come on, make the case. Something like this is very, very important to people.
And we're always up for a laugh on this show.
God, honestly, you'd think there were no problems in the world.
Real Britain, every Saturday on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falarin-Iman, and Tom Harwood on your TV, radio and online. We're with you until midday with the show jam-packed with today's biggest stories, lots of discussion, expert guests and our opinions, as well as yours.
Yes, so make sure you get in touch with your views as usual. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email address to use. We'll be getting to those throughout the show, but first, here's the latest news.
Good morning, it's 11 o'clock. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister has chaired his first cabinet meeting with his newly appointed team. A number of ministers have been given the same role, with Downing Street saying the cabinet reflects a unified party. Later, it's expected the Prime Minister will hold talks with the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, on their economic plans and decide when the fiscal plan due to be delivered on Monday will take place. Shadow Education Secretary Bridget Phillipson claims the government has no plans for growth.
We're in a terrible situation now as a country, facing, that black hole that they've created, and we still don't actually fully know the scale of the damage because they've refused to publish the report from the Office of Budget Responsibility that would give us that information. But there is no plan for growth. We've had terrible growth under the Conservatives for the last 12 years, and in fact under Rishi Sunak, who was Chancellor for a significant period of that.
Well, in an hour's time, Rishi Sunak will make his first appearance in the Commons as Prime Minister. He'll face opposition leader Sir Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's questions. It comes as Labour is calling for Cabinet Secretary Simon Case to investigate the Home Secretary Suella Braverman after she reportedly breached the ministerial code. Tory MSP and Scotland's Shadow Health Secretary Dr Sandesh Gulane has welcomed Miss Braverman's return.
Suella Braverman was right to resign, but Rishi Sunak's reappointed her because she paid the price for her mistake. But the other thing we need to be clear about, the cabinet we have is a unity cabinet. He is getting people in from across the broad church of the Conservative Party. And actually, that's the best way of governing, to be able to get people from different points of view in your cabinet to have those robust discussions.
Well, you can watch Rishi Sunak's first Prime Minister's questions live here on GB News at midday. Well, the new Prime Minister has held talks with the First Ministers of Scotland and Wales. In discussion with Nicola Sturgeon and Mark Drakeford, Rishi Sunak is said to have emphasised the UK's shared challenges, with Scotland's First Minister saying the talks had been constructive. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and US President Joe Biden were among the first world leaders to speak with Mr Sunak last night. In other news, a parliamentary committee is warning a proposed bill dealing with the legacy of Northern Ireland's troubles risks widespread breaches of human rights law. Ministers are proposing a form of amnesty for the perpetrators of the Troubles crimes in exchange for cooperation with a new truth recovery body. The Joint Committee on Human Rights says the plans may not meet international standards on the duty to investigate deaths, but the government says the legislation as a whole complies with human rights laws. Around 7 in 10 NHS trusts are failing to meet their targets for cancer referrals. In England, the current maximum wait time for a hospital appointment for suspected cancer is 2 weeks. NHS England says 93% of patients should be seen within this time frame, but data shows this target is routinely not being met. People looking to earn extra money as the cost of living crisis bites are being urged to watch out for scammers. Recent figures from trade association UK Finance show that over £600 million were lost due to fraud in the first half of 2022. 1 in 6 people say the rising cost of living means they're more likely to respond to an unprompted approach from someone offering an investment opportunity or a loan. Climate activists have targeted 2 luxury car showrooms with spray paint this morning. Just Stop Oil protesters sprayed orange paint on Ferrari and Bentley dealers in central London. The Metropolitan Police say 2 people have been arrested on suspicion of criminal damage in relation to the protest. A new study shows that people who join Scouts and Guides as children are more likely to have good health later in life. Scientists at the University of Edinburgh found that Scouts and Guides tend to have better mental health as adults and have higher levels of social mobility. With almost 500,000 children currently in Scouts, researchers are calling it a cost-effective way of improving the health of the population. The Princess of Wales is to be the patron of a new mission for an army officer to be the first woman to cross Antarctica solo. Catherine is formally backing Captain Preet Chandy's challenge of travelling more than 1,000 miles across the frozen continent. The army officer has apparently spoken with the princess on the phone, who wished her good luck. This is GB News. We'll bring you more news as it happens. Now, though, it's back to the point.
Good morning, this is To The Point on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and indeed Anaya Iman as well on your TV, radio and online. We've got a great show for you lined up over our final hour, so here's what's coming up.
Yes, well, new Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has put together his cabinet with many faces from the previous one, including Suella Braverman as Home Secretary and Jeremy Hunt retaining his position as Chancellor. Sunak will face his first Prime Minister's questions later today.
And as the war in Ukraine continues, Rishi Sunak has reassured Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky that the UK will continue to support the country in its war against Russia. President Zelensky was the first foreign leader Sunak called after his appointment as Prime Minister.
And as Suella Braverman resumes her role in charge at the Home Office, her top priority is the growing small boats crisis, with 38,000 people having arrived so far this year. GB News can reveal authorities are now deeply concerned about the potential for serious disorder at a migrant processing centre in Kent. We'll be looking at that in more detail just later.
Well, we've got all of that coming up and so much more across the programme. And remember, do get in touch with your views, as usual, gbviews@gbnews.uk. We're going to start off. Yeah.
Just before we go to our top story, we're just going to go to some of your views. I mean, we've got many of them flooding in. A lot of support coming in, interestingly, for Suella Braverman. Many of our GB viewers saying that Rishi Sunak, the new Prime Minister, is right to back her.
Yes. Although there was one view that caught my eye that just came in off the back of that interview that we did with Barry Shearman, the Labour MP. Colin has written in to say, just watch the Labour MP talking rubbish, and it proves what everyone knows, it's all about Brexit. And this attitude from Labour is why they got decimated at the 2019 general election, because Barry did bring up the idea that the United Kingdom was underperforming because of Brexit. But we've done a little bit of digging, and indeed the economist Julian Jessup has run the numbers on this. Here is the UK's economy performance compared to Germany since the quarter before the Brexit vote. So this is since the end of 2015. And actually, if we look at the numbers here, the UK economy is 6.9% larger. That's growth that we've had since before the referendum vote, whereas the German economy, by comparison, is only 5.9% larger. So that's more growth in the UK post the Brexit vote than Germany has had.
No, I think that is a fair point, and I think it would be, in the wake of the Ukraine crisis and the COVID lockdowns, it would be very absurd to suggest that the economic challenge we're in is solely down to Brexit. But on top of that, it was one of the largest democratic votes in the history of this country. To reverse that or to just ignore that would have been unthinkable, and I don't think that the Labour Party would be wise to keep banging the drum of anti-Brexit sentiment, but that's just my thoughts.
Yes, I think that probably Sir Keir Starmer would wish his backbenchers would stop doing so as well. But, of course, back to our top story today. Rishi Sunak used his first speech as Prime Minister to pledge he'll fix the mistakes of Liz Truss's premiership, his words, and to restore integrity to government.
I want to pay tribute to my predecessor, Liz Truss. She was not wrong to want to improve growth in this country. It is a noble aim. And I admired her restlessness to create change. But some mistakes were made.
Well, the PM's new cabinet assembled yesterday with many of the same faces from the previous one, including the Home Secretary Suella Braverman, who was controversially reappointed after being forced to resign just days ago. The Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, who took over from Kwasi Kwarteng in an attempt to calm markets, remains in post, alongside Foreign Secretary James Cleverly, who also retains his position.
Well, let's get more now with our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, because in the last minute there has been some breaking news. And that's that the key economic statement we were expecting on Monday has been delayed now for more than 2 weeks. The new date, the 17th of November. What more can you tell us, Darren?
Yeah, indeed. We just had a cabinet readouts from cabinet this morning that broke up, just over or around an hour ago. And as you said, that fiscal event that we're expecting next Monday, that had been in the diary since Jeremy Hunt had become the new Chancellor under Liz Truss. There was much speculation over the last day or so that would be delayed, that they wanted to get it right, that it wouldn't be next Monday, the 31st, Halloween, with all the possible horror story headlines you may well have around that as well. It is now delayed, and it's been rebranded as the Autumn Statement, and it will take place on November the 17th. Which is a Thursday, which is pretty unusual, I'd say, for a fiscal statement. And also, I think the reason it's on a Thursday is because that is also the week of the G20, which the Prime Minister will be attending in Indonesia, in Bali. So on Thursday, November 17th, we're going to get the details of the kind of medium-term fiscal plan. We'll also get those OBR reports into the state of the British economy, if you like. It was in part the fact that was not issued at the time of the mini-budget that led us into the crisis that we saw in terms of soaring interest rates and the collapse in sterling. Now, how are the markets going to react to this delay? I think on the whole, given that things have been pretty stable over the last couple of days, really since Rishi Sunak seemed to be the favourite to be Conservative leader, I'm not expecting a massive market reaction. Though, frankly, it is better to talk to Liam Halligan about that. I do see that sterling is essentially up to, 116, I think, today. So a sign that there has been some confidence restored there. We also did get further details of what was discussed in Cabinet, by the way, Tom. The Chancellor talked about economic stability, but the Foreign Secretary, updated about the international situation and the threat posed by Russia. The Home Secretary talked about ongoing work to tackle illegal immigration, and the Prime Minister said this was a complex and challenging issue that the public rightly expected the government to find a long-lasting solution to. And the Prime Minister concluded by saying the government faced an enormous task, but that he remained confident they would deliver for the whole of the United Kingdom. He said now was the time to get to work and repay the trust of the British public. One other piece of news, that is the Prime Minister, of course, is going to go to PMQs, Prime Minister's Question Time, in the next 30 minutes or so. He'll leave Downing Street, travel the very short distance to Parliament. I suspect there will be questions about Suella Braverman and her appointment as Home Secretary, not least of all because Yvette Cooper, her shadow, the Shadow Home Secretary, has issued a statement in the last hour as well, writing to the Cabinet Secretary asking about the reappointment of Suella Braverman as Home Secretary, given her resignation last week and the fact that she admitted a mistake by sending emails she shouldn't have done. Yvette Cooper asking the Cabinet Secretary whether an investigation has been completed into whether any security lapses or similar breaches of the Ministerial Code by Suella Braverman has taken place, and whether there is also an investigation by the Home Office or the Cabinet Office, and what assessment has been made of the severity of these security lapses involved, i.e. Labour trying to pile the pressure here on the government about the appointment of Suella Braverman. There have been reports this morning that Simon Case, the Cabinet Secretary, was not terribly happy about it. It will be an issue, I suspect, at PMQs today, alongside possibly those tough economic decisions. Another test, of course, for the new Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, as he takes to that dispatch box at midday.
I suppose another couple of words that we'll be listening out for carefully at Prime Minister's questions will be non-DOMs. It's something that Keir Starmer has brought up in a number of Prime Minister's questions in the past when he thought perhaps Rishi Sunak was more likely to become Prime Minister. Might this new Prime Minister's wealth and the situation, the tax affairs of his family, be brought into the discussion today?
It may well be, Tom. I don't know for certain. You're right, though, it is an attack line for the Labour Party. Is today to bring it up? I'm not entirely sure about that, but be in no doubt, I think that line, also Labour have issued an attack ad in the last day or so. Again, this is politics, unsurprisingly attacking Rishi Sunak, focusing on that statement he made in Tunbridge Wells during the summer campaign about the redistribution of wealth and government funding away from parts of northern England to the south. Now, Rishi Sunak has made it clear that there are areas of deprivation, severe areas of deprivation, just as much in southern England as there is in the north. And I think actually relatively that played well with the Conservative base. It's one of the things he got right as a Conservative campaign, but Labour clearly think it is something that may well work well in the red seats, and I suspect whether it's today or next week or sometime in the future, again, that will be an attack that Sir Keir Starmer will try to land on the Prime Minister. But aside from all of that, of course, there are still decisions to be made about who serves in government, because while we've had the appointment of the Cabinet, Tom, we've not had the whole raft of junior ministerial kind of toings and goings, the hokey-cokey about who's in and who's out in those Minister of States and PPS jobs and elsewhere. And that job will begin immediately after PMQs with the firings, the sackings, if you like, happening inside Parliament, as is tradition. And then he'll come back here to Downing Street to appoint those new junior ministers, a process that will take certainly hours and may well drag into tomorrow.
Well, thank you, Darren McCaffrey, our political editor, for bringing us the latest on those political developments. And it is interesting you mentioned the delay in the economic announcement. I wonder if that's somewhat of a contrast to the strategy of Liz Truss, which was kind of going thick and fast and very early on, and he wants to demonstrate that slow and steady pace.
But speaking of the economic statement, indeed, we have some words now from the Chancellor, who will be making that statement, who has delayed that statement. This is what he had to say.
Our number one priority is economic stability and restoring confidence that the United Kingdom is a country that pays its way. And for that reason, the medium-term fiscal plan is extremely important. And I want to confirm that it will demonstrate debt falling over the medium term, which is very important for people to understand. But it's also extremely important that that statement is based on the most accurate possible economic forecasts and forecasts of public finances. And for that reason, the Prime Minister and I have decided that it is prudent to make that statement on the 17th of November, when it will be upgraded to a full autumn statement. And I've discussed this last night with the Governor of the Bank of England. He understands the reasons for doing that, and I'll continue to work very closely with him. The best way to ensure that the decisions that we take, these very, very difficult decisions, are ones that stand the test of time and give us the best chance of giving people security over their mortgages, over their jobs, over the cost of living concerns that everyone has. I have demonstrated in the short time that I've been Chancellor that I'm willing to take decisions very quickly, and I'm willing to make choices that are politically embarrassing if they're the right thing to do for the country, if they're in the national interest. Well, she apologised for her mistakes. She has been fully accountable for those mistakes. She stepped down as Home Secretary. But from the point of view of people at home who want stability in the economy, they also need to see a united Conservative Party, and that's why the Prime Minister has put together a cabinet of all talents.
Was the Chancellor there, Jeremy Hunt. It was interesting, many of the words, prudent, stability, security, you know, it's focusing on that more competent element for a Chancellor.
Yes, and trying to avoid the rushing into things that perhaps has been a big criticism of the last administration. Also, a commitment there in clear terms to get debt falling over the medium term. That's a clear commitment from the Chancellor for his new upgraded full autumn statement on the 17th of November.
Well, coming up, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak promised that the UK will continue to support Ukraine as the war rages on with Russia. But what does this mean and how? We'll be discussing all of that and much more just after the break.
Hello, rather changeable weather for most of us over the next few days and in fact into the weekend as well. Windy conditions, but very mild for the time of year with a mixture for the rest of today of sunshine and showers. And the reason for the unsettled weather is this area of low pressure which swept a cold front across the country earlier on this morning. That's now clearing away to the north and east, leaving in its wake a mixture of sunny spells and showers. Some of those showers could well be on the heavy side, maybe even the odd rumble of thunder, particularly likely for northern and western parts of the UK. Elsewhere, there will be a good amount of sunshine with a little bit of patchy cloud coming and going. But look at those temperatures, well above average for this time of year, mid to high teens, and we could just touch the low 20s given a little bit of prolonged sunshine. Now through this evening, conditions remain fairly similar, a few lingering showers to begin with, but then it's all changed from the southwest as this area of showery rain pushes in, gradually edging northwards across the country through the early hours of a Thursday morning. Within this, there will be some heavy bursts. Again, the odd rumble of thunder is possible as it trundles its way northwards through the latter part of the night and into Thursday. Northern Ireland in particular could see some very heavy and prolonged rain for a time on Thursday, and again on Friday with more rain on the cards for western parts of the UK. But back to Thursday, quite a lot of cloud around, temperatures once again well above average despite the breezy conditions, mid to high teens and possibly again just about touching the low 20s. Thursday evening, that showery rain continues to push northwards across Scotland, clearing elsewhere, but leaving quite a lot of cloud in its wake. And I mentioned further rain in the west on Friday, but temperatures still remaining well above average for the time of year, with breezy conditions for most, and that remains into the weekend.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello
Hello, I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m, where I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians as we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight. If it's a big story, we'll be covering it, I guarantee, but we'll also have some fun along the way. That's GB News Headliners at 11 p.m. We won't put you to sleep, unlike some of the other paper review shows out there. So join us, 11 p.m, 7 nights a week.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and TuneIn apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online at gbnews.uk.
Take us with you wherever you go. GB News Radio.
You never have to miss a moment of the People's Channel.
Join me, Arlene Foster, for the briefing on GB News. Every Friday at 3 p.m, I'll give you all the latest political news and analysis, and we'll have robust live debate. To make sure that you're caught up on all of the biggest issues of the day, we'll bring on experts in their field. I'll ask the questions that you'd like to ask. We're not afraid to tackle discussions from all perspectives, including yours. Don't forget, the briefing with me, Arlene Foster, every Friday at 3 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Alastair Stewart, and I'd invite you to join me at noon on Saturdays and Sundays for Alastair Stewart and Friends. I've been in this business for over 40 years. Now, here at GB News, I've never been happier. I get to choose the big stories that really interest me. We hear what you have to say, and you hear what I have to say. I really hope you can join me, noon on Saturdays and Sundays.
It's 11:24. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Florin-Eman and Tom Harwood. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning.
Yes, well, in his first address to the nation as Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak said the terrible war in Ukraine must be seen successfully to its conclusion. He spoke with the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky last night to tell him that the UK's support will remain as strong as ever under his premiership.
Yes, as the war continues to rage on, with a missile strike on a petrol station in Dnipro, killing at least 2 civilians. What needs to be done now for Ukraine? Well, joining us now to discuss this as Andriy Osajushk, Ukrainian Member of Parliament. Thank you so much for joining us. I mean, in the UK now we have a new Prime Minister. Our previous Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, was known for his steadfast and committed support for Ukraine. I mean, are you reassured by the statements of Rishi Sunak, our Prime Minister, that we will continue to support you and stand shoulder by shoulder with the Ukrainian people?
Good afternoon. First of all, we're happy to see on the position of Prime Minister, young, extremely professional and high-skilled individual who definitely has all needed capabilities to continue to promote the foreign policy which was established by Boris Johnson, especially towards barbarian war of Russian Federation. So we don't have any doubts that under leadership of new Prime Minister, the United Kingdom will continue to play this leadership role in fighting with the Russian Federation as they did before. So no doubts on that at all. Ukraine is relying on United Kingdom as on our biggest ally and friend in all parameters. Said that, yes, for the last weeks we have this ongoing missiles attack on Ukrainian cities, which is another confirmation that Russian military can do nothing with Ukrainian military, and now they openly fighting with anyone who is living in Ukraine. And the only good answer on that is strengthening Ukrainian air defense system. We're talking on that from day one. Until today, Ukrainian sky remains to be a biggest challenge for everyone who is living here, for lives of people and for infrastructure. Because yes, they want to try to freeze us by switching off electricity supply and heating supply all over the country.
It seems like the nature of this war has developed, has changed in the last couple of weeks, with the Russians lashing out against the civilians of Ukraine to a greater extent than they have done for quite some time, with these unmanned, terrorising drones raining down on cities that had thought they'd seen the back of the Russians, and also the idea that in Kherson there will be a pretty scorched earth strategy from the Russians as well. Are we expecting to see this war get perhaps less professional and maybe more dangerous for ordinary civilians?
I think you are wrong saying that something changed. So civilians were brutally killed in Bucha 5-6 months ago, meaning that all the time of all this 8 months of war, Russia was targeting Ukrainians because they're Ukrainian. Russians were killing civilians just because they're civilian. So that's why nothing changed. The only big change that, yes, they can do nothing with Ukrainian military. Yes, they don't have enough Russian-made military equipment to attack Ukraine. So that's why they switched to these barbarians, Iranian-made kamikaze drone, which is absolutely chaotic. So they're attacking targets without any concrete navigation details, meaning that it's a mass destruction weapons which currently used by Russian Federation. Talking about Kherson, it's a very interesting story because it's absolutely clear for any military experts that Russian military group in the right bank of the Dnieper is doomed to collapse simply because they don't have supply chains, because Ukraine destroy all the bridges and we keep fire control on all supply chain. So Putin just keep his group on the right bank because another defeat of his military can create additional huge problems for his leadership in Kremlin. But again, Russian units in Kherson, they're doomed to failure. As fast as they will leave Kherson, as more soldiers they will save. But I don't think that Russian military leadership care about their soldiers.
And just finally, Andrew Osachek, I mean, you mentioned that you're still confident about the UK support, but taking more internationally in terms of the European Union and America, I mean, what is your sense about their relationship with Ukraine going forward, and whether or not there is still the morale and confidence and determination to continue to support the Ukrainian struggle?
It's quite simple. Here in Ukraine, we are defending not Ukraine, we are defending European and Western democracy. And Western democracy is about political fight. There were never ever unanimous decisions in democracy, neither in UK nor in US or elsewhere. It is a democratical fight. And now, yes, we're witnessing another circle of elections in the United States, for example. And definitely different politicians are speaking about different things because they're fighting to win elections. But we're confident because we're sticking to the fundamental position of the leaders of the free world. And if you take the latest communique from G7, which in fact was G8 because Ukraine was participating equally in this summit, the G8 memorandum is very clear about support of Ukrainian position and about support of Ukrainian vision of victory and punishment of Russia. The same on the NATO level. So we are confident that European and Western leaders are united with understanding that only Ukrainian victory can bring the end to this nightmare in Europe.
Well, Andrei Asadchuk, Ukrainian Member of Parliament, thank you so much for joining us here on GB News this morning. Really appreciate your perspective there, and stay safe in Kiev as well. Slava Ukraini. I find that fascinating. The unmanned drones from Iran that are targeting areas that don't feel like they're at war, Lviv, Kiev. And I think back to what my grandparents told me about what it was like living in the United Kingdom in the Second World War, when The Germans were sending over the V1 and the V2 rockets, the doodlebugs, the sort of air raid sirens they would hear, the distinctive noise of those unmanned missiles, and then the explosions. And I see reports from Ukraine. You hear those same sound of air raid sirens. You hear the distinctive sound of those Iranian drones, and then the explosions. And it's just such an eerie sort of echo of what we faced in this country.
I mean, the extraordinary brutality is really astonishing, and I think it has been a huge wake-up call to many people, particularly the political leadership in Western societies, thinking that conflict in Europe was gone. That was a kind of bygone era. It is very much here and looking like it may well be here for several months and years to come, and we must prepare for that reality.
Absolutely, and the axis of Russia, of Iran, of Chinese money as well. There is a group of anti-democratic, autocratic countries that are working together here. And that's something to really worry us all.
Well, after the break, Suella Braverman resumes her role as Home Secretary just 6 days after she was forced to resign the position after admitting to data breaches. Her top priority is to tackle the illegal migrant and small boats crisis, one that the previous Home Secretary also said, but, you know, an important issue to GB News viewers. But coming up, we'll be discussing that just after the morning news.
Hello, good morning. It's 11:33. I'm Tamsin Roberts in the GB newsroom with the latest. The Chancellor has delayed the announcement of the government's economic plan by 2 weeks. Jeremy Hunt says the medium-term plan, which was due to be delivered next Monday, will be upgraded to an autumn statement. The Chancellor says it's important to reach the right decisions and that the new statement will be accompanied by a full forecast from the Office for Budget Responsibility. It will now be delivered on November the 17th.
I have demonstrated in the short time that I've been Chancellor that I'm willing to take decisions very quickly, and I'm willing to make choices that are politically embarrassing if they're the right thing to do for the country, if they're in the national interest. Now we have a new Prime Minister and the prospect of much longer term stability for the economy in the country. And in that context, a short 2.5 week delay is the best way we will make sure that it is the right decisions we take.
Well, Rishi Sunak will make his first appearance in the Commons as Prime Minister shortly. He'll face opposition leader Sir Keir Starmer at Prime Minister's questions. It comes as Labour is calling for Cabinet Secretary Simon Case to investigate the Home Secretary Suella Braverman after she reportedly breached the ministerial code. And you can watch PMQs live here on GB News at midday. Well, the Prime Minister has chaired his first Cabinet meeting with his newly appointed team. A number of ministers have been given the same role, with Downing Street saying the Cabinet reflects a unified party. Nearly a dozen of Liz Truss's top-tier ministers, including Jacob Rees-Mogg, left the Cabinet following Mr Sunak's appointment. Meanwhile, the new Prime Minister has held talks with the First Ministers of Scotland and Wales. In discussion with Nicola Sturgeon and Mark Drakeford, Rishi Sunak is said to have emphasised the UK's shared challenges, with Scotland's First Minister saying the talks had been constructive. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky and US President Joe Biden were among the first world leaders to speak with Mr Sunak last night. And away from politics, the Princess of Wales is to be the patron of a new mission for an army officer to be the first woman to cross Antarctica solo. Catherine is formally backing Captain Preet Chandy's challenge of travelling more than 1,000 miles across the frozen continent. The army officer has spoken with the Princess on the phone, who wished her good luck. Very good luck to her. TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News.
Weekday afternoons on GB News, we've got the whole of the UK covered. From 12 to 3, it's GB News Day with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Gloria Di Piero. You'll get the very latest on everything that's been going on across our great nation.
And from 3 till 6, watch out for GB News Live with me, Patrick Christys. I'm not here to mess around. With all the biggest topics and guests, you will always be up to date. GB News Day and GB News Live from 12 p.m.
Only on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi there, it's Stephen and Anne.
At breakfast from 6 a.m, you'll always be caught up with everything you need to know, the latest headlines, opinions and debates.
We'll bring you the good news and the bad, but most of all, we're here for you.
Remember, send in your views and let us know what you would like us to talk about.
That's because we're your news channel. And every morning at 6 a.m, it's breakfast on GB News.
Join me, Nana Akua, on Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Friday, Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News.
On Mark Dolan tonight, we have a simple plan, which is to inform, stimulate and entertain in equal measure. It's all about getting your opinions on the national television airwaves. I love my viewer emails, mark@gbnews.uk. So do join me from 9 p.m. to midnight every Friday, Saturday and Sunday for big guests, big opinions and a big presenter. 6'5", don't you know? See you then on GB News.
Well, it's 11:38. This is To The Point on GB News with me, Anaya Falarin-Iman and Tom Harwood. We're live on your TV, online and radio this morning.
Well, Suella Braverman has been appointed Home Secretary by Rishi Sunak less than a week after her dramatic departure from that very same position in Liz Truss's cabinet. Her tough stance on illegal migration is likely to define her tenure, with a special focus on stopping those small boats from crossing the Channel. 38,000 people have arrived so far this year. GB News can reveal that authorities are now deeply concerned about the potential for a serious disorder at a migrant processing centre in Kent.
Well, our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, is there to report on the growing levels of violence between different groups as asylum seekers and increasingly, apparently, are assaulting staff. Well, thank you for joining us, Mark. Please just tell us what's going on.
Well, indeed, sources telling me that they are very concerned. There's a powder keg atmosphere in Manston Air Base here. This is the processing centre where all those that land on UK shores are taken to. They're supposed to spend no more than a couple of days here before they're then farmed out to temporary accommodation in the likes of hotels before going on to council houses or wherever they will be put in for the longer term. But what is happening is that the 1,000 capacity here has been well exceeded and is growing all of the time. That's adding to tensions and outbreaks of violence, and they're just not getting them processed out to the interim accommodation, so that they're spending in some cases up to a month here. Now this chimes what we're hearing with the evidence that the Home Affairs Select Committee has been hearing just in the last hour in Parliament, with the Chief Inspector of Borders saying that he carried out an inspection or a visit to Manston just this past Monday. 1,000, as I say, is supposed to be the capacity here. He found 2,800 people within the base here. These people being guarded by groups of guards who just lack the proper training to deal with these individuals on a security level. And last night, for instance, sources telling me there were 7 separate incidents of violence that broke out within the Manston base, and some real concerns that it may only be a matter of time before we're seeing something similar to what happened at Napier Barracks about a year ago, when those that were being held there set fire to those barracks. So some real concern. Couple that, of course, with the assaults on staff, which are increasing as well, then there are some real issues that the new Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, has got to grapple with before she even deals with, of course, the increasing number of people coming across the Channel.
Well, thank you, our Home and Security Editor, Mark White, for bringing us the latest developments on the migrant channel crossings.
Mm.
Well, joining us now to discuss this further, specialist immigration lawyer Evan Sampson. Thank you for coming into the studio. We were just discussing in the break just there that, you know, that there is that concern that people have. It's not always that people don't want any immigration at all or just want to pull up the drawbridge, but it is the illegal immigration that concerns a lot of people. What do you think?
I think that's right. I mean, there's a distinction between legal and illegal migration. And I think there's consensus that we're short of skilled workers. We need them. We need them to grow our economy, and that's absolutely right. To the skilled worker visa route, and I'm awaiting the changes to those routes to make it easier for employers to recruit foreign workers. Regarding illegal migration, there's two types. There's one where they're seeking asylum. And let's be quite clear, they don't need to enter legally under the Refugee Convention. In fact, you can even use a false passport to enter the UK. And you cannot be prosecuted for that under the convention.
And that's international law that we have no control over.
Well, we can come out of it. That's the control we have. But if we want to send the right message across, that we must comply with and adhere to our international treaty obligations. But no, because people fleeing persecution may not necessarily be able to go back home and get documents, get their passports. They may not even have passports.
But a lot of people are very sceptical. I totally understand that, and I think it would send a questionable message. But, you know, there's a democracy question there. But at the end of the day, a lot of people are very sceptical that the people that are coming over across the channel are genuine refugees and asylum seekers. You know, if we look at some of the countries, the top countries are Albania, Iran. Undoubtedly, there is instability going on in those countries, but they are hardly fleeing war in the way that we generally understand to be refugees.
I agree with you. Look, if you're not a genuine refugee, you should be sent back to your country of
What if
origin.
they burn their passports or get rid of them? What can we do?
That's a problem. So I think technology can come into this, and we have an agreement with Albania with regards to identifying these individuals. And technology can certainly do that. We do that with age. For example, they do assessments, teeth analysis assessments, to assess someone's age. You can actually assess someone's origin through their DNA, and also working with the authorities, the countries where you want to send them back to. But let me get 50% of people crossing are genuine refugees. And we have to remember that.
I suppose a lot of people would therefore say 50% aren't. And we really do not have a 50% success rate in terms of removing those who aren't the genuine refugees. And it is very frustrating for people seeing when planes can't fly. It makes the government look impotent. I wonder, just in our last 30 seconds, does the government have a chance of getting this right, of fixing it? Or is it always going to look relatively impotent in the face of international law?
Just a quick three-point plan Suella Braverman has. One, stop them coming across. Impossible. The waters are too wide, the international borders. Two, she has an agreement with Rwanda to send them back. Do we send them back to a country which has an atrocious human rights record? And did you know for every refugee we send to Rwanda, they can send one back here?
Yeah.
So there's people claiming asylum from Rwanda.
Yeah.
Wow.
Just
very quickly, if you will.
Quickly.
Yeah, the third thing, the policy, is to make it a crime. That failed.
Yeah, ultimately it's a complicated and very difficult situation to resolve.
Yeah, no doubt it's been intractable for Priti Patel. Maybe Suella Braverman will have some more success, but I mean, the tide is against her, isn't it?
Well, Ivan Sampson there, specialist immigration lawyer, thank you so much for joining us on the programme. Well, that's it from us. On to the point, but don't go away. We'll be bringing you PMQs and all of the political developments with GB News Day with Gloria and Mark.
Hello, rather changeable weather for most of us over the next few days and in fact into the weekend as well. Windy conditions, but very mild for the time of year with a mixture for the rest of today of sunshine and showers. And the reason for the unsettled weather is this area of low pressure which swept a cold front across the country earlier on this morning. That's now clearing away to the north and east, leaving in its wake a mixture of sunny spells and showers. Some of those showers could well be on the heavy side, maybe even the odd rumble of thunder, particularly likely for northern and western parts of the UK. Elsewhere, there will be a good amount of sunshine with a little bit of patchy cloud coming and going.